So, broadcast is live. Welcome, everyone. I am Dewana Brockington. I am the chair of the Black Ink Book Festival, and my dog just chose this moment to start barking. Tonight, we have Dr. Seretha Williams, and our topic is Afrofuturism. And I think we're going to have a great conversation. We're going to take a deep dive all over the place. I am super excited. So I'm going to start with Dr. Williams's bio, and then we will get into our conversation. And at the end, we'll also give you some highlights about what the festival looks like this year. We are, again, super excited. We weren't sure what we were going to do on the heels of romance, but I think we've hit upon something really well. So, Dr. Seretha Williams is the chair of English and World Languages at Augusta University and professor of English and Women's and Gender Studies. Her research includes African diaspora and women's literatures and digital humanities. Cannot wait to learn more about that. She is a content expert on Margaret Walker Alexander, the Black Chicago Renaissance, and the Black Arts Movement. Dr. Williams is the editor of the Third Stone Journal, a digital publication focused on Afrofuturism, a member of the steering committee for the Recovery Hub for American Women Writers, and a co-PI for a Happy Trust Scholar curated work sets for analysis, reuse, and dissemination. So SC Ward, is that correct?
Just squared.
Squared, okay. Project titled The Black Fantastic, Curated Vocabularies, Artifact Analysis, and Identification. She is currently completing a book project on Margaret Walker's unpublished manuscript, Goose Island. Welcome, Dr. Williams. Thank you so much for taking time out to join us tonight. And I'm just going to jump right in.
Awesome.
That was your bio. Tell us something about you that's not in your bio.
Let's see. So that's what I do. I do hear a little feedback. I don't know if you can hear that on your end. Let me turn my volume down some. Is that better? Yeah, okay, that's better. So I'm from Gary, Indiana, and people who know me know that that's really important. I've been living in Georgia and in the South for a very long time now, probably longer than I lived in Gary, Indiana, but that's a really important component of my personality. And then I'll also mention that when I was in graduate school, I was studying magical realism, and I think that probably was maybe the beginning of my interest in Afrofuturism, but I did not have the language of Afrofuturism to describe what I was trying to do. And then lastly, I'll just say I'm a mom of 3, and they're all in college. So that's me.
So let's talk about your magical realism for a minute, because that's kind of one of my faves. Who were you reading?
Mm-hmm. So what I started with was Toni Morrison, right? So I was like, this is magical realism. I was taking a class with Professor Leon Forrest. I was an undergrad at Northwestern University, and Leon Forrest, Toni Morrison had been his editor. So he had brought her to campus. He had a really close relationship. And when I went to college, I was reading Toni Morrison, I was like, oh, like this breath. It left my body and came back in a different way. And so he said, oh, so you like this, and so you should probably read like Gabriel Garcia Marquez. And I was like, okay, who was that? And then so it started there, and then I just kept thinking, and I was like, this sounds like my family, because in our family, people have this belief that the supernatural is a part of everything. It's not weird. My mother would say things like, the doorbell rang and nobody was out there. Oh, that's your ancestor. Or there's a bird, especially because I'm from Indiana, and there would be a cardinal, and she would say, oh, that's your uncle so and so. These were not strange things. This is just kind of how we thought about it. So when I was reading those same kinds of things in Toni Morrison's work, and then I read it in Gabriel Garcia Marquez and other writers, I said, okay, well, this must be, this is a part of something bigger. And I wanted to make the argument that what I ended up calling like the mythically real, because I didn't think that was magic, because magic suggests that it may not be real, that it's just kind of trickeration, right? But I was like, no, this is more like myth than like magic. And so that was the argument that I was making. So it was Toni Morrison. I looked at Toni Morrison. I looked at Leon Forrest. I looked at who else did I look at? Maurice Condé, Derek Walcott, Ben Okri. So I was trying to, get the diaspora, and the argument that I was attempting to make was that, this is a part of kind of African cosmology.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. And that kind of leads us to the topic of tonight. Define Afrofuturism for our audience, because I know it's a big word. It's a mouthful. But what's that definition?
Yeah, I don't think any of us agree what it means. And I think that's why it's so attractive. And my good friend, Bill Campbell, who is the publisher of Rosarian Publishing, we had this conversation, and he says, well, authors, like the writers, don't really want to have it defined. And as soon as they define it, then they don't want to do it anymore. And a lot of people reject that label anyway. So I would just say, a lot of times people think about that technology has to be a part of the definition. But somebody like Julian Chambliss, who's at Michigan State University, doesn't necessarily put that technology as a requirement, that, we're like moving through time, or we're, there are robots, or there's, we're in outer space. Like, you don't necessarily have to have that as a component, but you could. But really, he kind of thinks about this whole idea about this intersection of the speculative and Black liberation. And that's how Julian actually defines that. And I think that really works for me. It's flexible enough for me to start thinking about the breadth of what could possibly be Afrofuturism. I think all of us agree that there's how do we get free? Like, this is the thing. That's the component. I don't think anybody disagrees that that's the thing. Yeah, we're looking at the past, right, in order to understand the future as well. So there is a backwards looking in futurism. And but I think that we verge off at that point. And so I just like to really keep it flexible. And a lot of times I probably, instead of using Afrofuturism, I refer to the Black Fantastic.
I am here for that. So, and I have, excuse me, I have a lot of questions, and I want to make sure that I get to all of them.
Yes.
And I'm actually going to jump around a little bit.
That's fine.
So a lot of folks have come to understand Afrofuturism via Black Panther. Like, it came up on the majority's radar. I use that term. And it's very future focused. But what are your thoughts about Afrofuturism also being fantasy?
I think that in order to even kind of imagine oneself as free, that you have to set it in a different world. Like it can't be this world, right? We can't imagine ourselves. I mean, just even if you think about the whole kind of back to Africa movement, that this whole idea is like we can't get free here. This is a nation where we can never see ourselves as liberated. And so let's go back to the motherland. Let's go back to the continent of Africa. Black Panther does that for us. We're just imagining so that even if it's like, it's seemingly speaking forward, it's also speaking backwards, right? So we're thinking about at the same time, and we're thinking like the possibility. So the possibility of us living as whole, individualized, autonomous beings. If we never left that space, like what's the possibility of it, right? And so that's what I think it kind of represents. So it can't be like we have to, and this is dangerous also. So I want to say that because sometimes we can imagine a fantasy scape of Africa that doesn't align with Africa, and then we just kind of fall into the same kinds of tropes. And I think that as much as we all are loving Black Panther, that there's some concern that I have about like the ideas that we have of what Africa is and is not, is also a little bit problematic, but we're here to celebrate it, not to really kind of talk about the problematic parts. But no, I think that this whole idea of fantasy, like, provides us an opportunity to be more imaginative, to move beyond those limits of what we know it is. And so again, I think that writers and artists of all kinds, they're always trying to push the envelope and to get at the question. And if you have to go through fantasy to do it, then so be it.
Okay. So what types of themes tend to show up in Afrofuturism?
Yeah, the good thing is that, I was thinking about this, like, what do we see? And it depends on where we're looking. So I would say that we're always seeing, I'll say the blues. So, and go with me on this one. So I think that there's a blues aesthetics to Afrofuturism. And what I mean by that is that the blues, yes, talks about the suffering, but it's this idea of making meaning out of meaningless suffering. And that's kind of paraphrasing what Richard Wright has to say. But when we're thinking about the possibilities of uplift and sorrow. So if you think of the blues as just sad music, then you miss the whole point. You don't get it. Like it's actually like a technology, right? Along with like gospel music. It's like, how do you get yourself free? And so you do this kind of singing does that. I'm from that Chicago area, so I'm a house head. So I would argue that house music also does this, right? So when you hear this music, somehow it's moving you. And I would argue that, these are also like Afrofuturist technologies to help kind of help us tap in to our best selves, our future selves, our past selves. And so I think about those kinds of things as like technology. So it's hopefulness. That's where I was going with this. Like at the end of the day, there is a hopefulness. Like, yes, this, my man left me. He took my money. but I'm going to come out.
Yeah, my best friend.
But I'm coming out on the other side. I mean, this is just what we're saying. Like, this is the thing. And so there's not this despair. It's really important that, yes, we have darkness, but we find hope. And it's hope and hopefulness and the liberation. And that is a part of the culture. It's also what connects us through the diaspora as well. Yeah.
Oh my gosh, this is so amazing. And before I keep going, to our audience, if you guys have questions, thoughts, please post it. And we have Savannah managing things behind the scenes, and she'll get those questions to us. So let us know what your thoughts are. Share what you're thinking, what you have a burning question about. So you are the editor, correct, if I'm correct, of Third Stone Journal.
Mhm.
So tell us about your journal, and also tell us how you're contributing to Black liberation with this journal.
Absolutely. So, shout out to Myrtle Jones, one of my good friends, because we started this journal together. She was working at RIT, and we really just wanted to work on a project together. Her background is in digital media, and I was teaching myself digital humanities at the time. And I was like, well, we should do something, Myrtle, And so we thought that, well, okay, Afrofuturism is a perfect theme for us to kind of organize. But then we also started thinking about Afrofuturism as like a methodology, right? So we're both scholars, and so we're thinking like, well, what's the method? And of course, we are going to make sure that the journal is behind away from the paywall, so that we want the information. We want everybody to be able to have access to this. We didn't want it to the journal to only be limited to people who are working in institutions. We wanted practitioners, so we wanted visual artists, we want video, we want we want scholarly works, we want creative works, we wanted everything, and so we felt that we had to have a digital platform in order to do that, and to really kind of democratize it. But also it has to be peer reviewed for folks. So we do have a peer review process with that as well. And so I'm working on issue volume 3 right now. So we have 2 of those, and we'll provide that link so that you can go and check out the other ones, and hopefully submit something for not for this issue, but for next year's issue. And one of the things that my friends tell me was like, everybody talks about we need to professionalize and make sure that people understand Afrofuturism as a discipline. And so that's part of the thing that we wanted to do. We wanted to make sure that we have a space. So one of the things that we have that we feature in the journal is kind of an annotated bibliography. And so what we're doing there is, if there are articles, if there are books, if there are, pieces of music that people are saying, this is Afrofuturism. Because if you look on the internet, people are calling like everything. They're like, Frederick Douglass is Afrofuturism. I'm like, okay. And I'm not disagreeing, but how and why? Like, how is this? Like, everybody is putting that label. And so what we're attempting to do is to have those kinds of serious conversations and have people present arguments about it. Like, you can't just go around just calling like everything is Afrofuturism. How is that? And so that's one of the things that we're doing, and we're inviting people from who are professionals and who are maybe just enthusiasts to submit and to come into conversation. So kind of thinking about community, we're having a conversation, we're a community of practitioners and scholars, and we do a lot of collaborative work. I'm always collaborating with Julian Chambliss, and I've already mentioned Julian. Hey, Julian. But he does really good work, and he also works with the Futurism part of the Zora Neale Hurston Festival down in Eatonville. And so that's kind of one of the things that we do. And so our issues, we actually have invited Julian to be an editor, a guest editor. And so that's what we're working on. We did the Sonic last year, and we're doing visual this year. So that's another thing. So creating community, how do we get free? Creating possibilities and opportunities for people, knowing that maybe a lot of folks don't necessarily see Afrofuturism as legitimate, right?
Mm-hmm.
But here we are offering opportunities for you to have your work peer reviewed, right? So that liberates, that frees people up. And then also having it digital, people can go and they can download it and they can, share it. We're just trying to be together and have the conversation.
So you've said a lot, and I have 2 points actually, or questions. One, why is the legitimacy of why is that a thing that, because some people come up with a term like, nope, I'm gonna rant for a minute. Folks had no problem joining the cryptocurrency trend.
Yes.
I have questions. I'm a Gen Xer. I got questions. But why even question the legitimacy of Afrofuturism? Why would anybody question it?
Yeah, I mean, two things. One, it's people are thinking that it's coming out of popular culture. And
Oh.
so people question, popular culture. And so, one of my things is like, I'm like, oh no, this isn't just coming out of popular culture. We may see it manifesting,
Mhm.
in more visual ways in popular culture. But my argument is that we can go back and look at, the slave narratives, and we can find instances of Afrofuturism. Like, this is not a new thing, right? It's a part of the fabric of the culture. And then, it rears itself in different ways depending on the decade. And so, like, now we're in that kind of Black Panther visual moment of Afrofuturism. However, like, this is a thing. This goes back. And so I think that the fact that we look at this as popular culture, that's a thing. And then also, I will just say that in the academy, right, in the tower, people have a really difficult time of, introducing ideas that don't necessarily kind of go through the mainstream channels. And so this is something that has developed. The study of it, the interest in it has kind of grown up outside of that tower, right? And so, and then there are people bringing it back into that conversation. And so it raises some questions. And we have a lot of people doing this work, but we don't have a lot of publications dedicated. So there have been some special issues, but I think that if this is your area, you may be having difficulty getting some of your stuff like into those journals, because it's not seen as legitimate or serious as studying the Toni Morrison, right? Like, you could get it in there if you're like talking about Toni Morrison, right? And then maybe Afrofuturism is somewhere in there. But like, if you're full on looking at, I don't know, a text that is a part of like popular culture or something like that, I think you have a difficult time doing that. And so Third Stone hopes and intends to be a place where people can come together and think about this critically and seriously.
So that leads me to, you've used two terms tonight that are flipping my wig in the most positive way. And I want you to drill down a little. And you and I have had some of this conversation pre-show. I want you to talk about the Black Fantastic.
Okay.
Like, just when you said it, the hair, like everything stood up. I got goosebumps in the best way, because that like solidified it, that like nailed it. It is often difficult to explain Afrofuturism and also juxtaposed with African futurism, which we'll talk about in a moment. But if you just take a moment to talk about the Black Fantastic and how you define that, and then explain to us what digital humanities. What
Okay.
is that?
Okay. All right. Good. So we're using, and Clarissa West White is one of my research partners, and she's down at Bethune-Cookman. And we decided for our projects because Afrofuturism is problematic for people, because it was coined by Mark Derry, and he is not a person of African descent. And so a lot of people reject that term, on that basis. And so, and then there is African futurism, and we'll get more into that. But then there's like Afro surrealism. There are lots of different iterations of this same conversation and nuances, right? And so we thought, because we wanted to be inclusive, I don't want to have Nettie Okorafor in a separate category and not be able to talk about her together with N.K. Jemisin or Sophia Samatar or, Octavia Butler. I want to be able to talk about these writers together. And so Black Fantastic is that umbrella term that we're using that attempts to articulate that there are commonalities, but also differences in terms of like how these different genres are working individually and separately, but also together.
Awesome. Yeah. Thank you. And then what's digital
humanities? Okay. Yeah. So the simplest way, again, another term that people don't agree on. But a good way for you to think about this, humanities scholars are always trying to ask questions and trying to do investigation. What digital humanities allows us that we can use computers or other pieces of technology in order to ask questions that we couldn't ask and to answer questions that we couldn't answer. So, for instance, if I wanted to see, I don't know, water imagery, is water imagery and significant to like Black literary studies? And then maybe I could digitize, like, I don't know, maybe I'm going to look at Morrison and Alice Walker, and maybe we'll have like Ralph Ellison, or maybe we'll have Langston Hughes. We'll put all of those, we'll digitize those, and then we can use a piece of software that will put words together and do some kind of analysis for us. Well, no, we do the analysis, but kind of move things around, count words, and then we can say, oh, okay, yeah. So like water keeps coming up a lot. And so maybe that's an important element. And it allows us to do like big data. So you've heard of big data. It allows us to do big data, but then also we can get really micro. We can look for like, verb use in a particular text, maybe Octavia Butler's use of verbs. We could go really big, or we could go really small. And so it's just the technology. There's a methodology that goes along with that. And so one of the things that I'm working on is the promotion of more Black DH. And so I work with some different groups, and also teaching myself, because, this was not a thing that I had in my graduate study program. And so I literally have been teaching myself. And then I decided in 2017 to go to library information school after doing all this, because I was hoping that it would help me to make some sense of all of those different things. So I'm still a student. I'm still learning about digital humanities myself. But to me, Afrofuturism and digital humanities make sense. They have a lot of the same tenets, the same beliefs. So this whole idea that we need to have not make knowledge accessible, right? That it's not going to be held behind a paywall. You don't have to be at the tower in order to access it. So to me, it's a natural pairing.
Nice. Thank you for that. And I'm glad I didn't ask that while we were prepping. So you've been in the South for a minute.
Yes.
How do you see Afrofuturism and Southern Blackness connecting?
Yeah. I think, I'm thinking about this, and I'm like, wow, this should be an easy question for me to answer, but I don't know, because this is a great question that I haven't thought about it. So thank you for asking, because even if I don't get the answer right tonight, I will be continuing to think through this. One of the ways that I think is this notion of the imagination is so important in just kind of thinking about like Black Southernness, that there is this inventiveness that you see in the South, And it's making a way out of no way, right? Like you use your imagination, your creative, your innovations, because like you don't have, again, this is how we understand soul food, right? So you take what you have and then you put, my professor Forrest would say, you put a stamp of elegance on it. So like we don't just like make it into something else, we make it great. We do everything we do, we do that. But specifically kind of thinking about in the South, where we have, racism and oppression is everywhere, but like it's so overt in the South, or has been so overt in the South, and constantly like rearing its heads. We're in this political moment right now, um, that you're constantly having to like reinvent ways, come up with different strategies and techniques. And so thinking about like Afrofuturism as something that people did, I think is wrong. I think we have to think of like Afrofuturism is also what we're doing right now. It is absolutely right here. It's how we're trying to think through, how do we get through this next election? How do we use social media? How do we use other types of technologies in order to stay alive, right? How do we keep one another safe? we're doing this like right now. Afrofuturism is now. It's not the past. It's not the future. It's like the moment. That is where we are. Absolutely. And I don't really, I'm just thinking about this, and I want to come back to this whole notion of like how this connection to the South. I think my family is originally from Mississippi, and so I think about the different Souths, because I do recognize that that culture, Black culture in Mississippi, is not the same as Black culture in Georgia or South Carolina. They're distinct differences, right? And then also, Black culture is also informed by other folks, because if we go back to the Harlem Renaissance, and you think that like the Harlem Renaissance was only like those Black people that came from the South and moved to the North, that's wrong, because like the Schomburg, that man was from Puerto Rico. So the Caribbean is a part of this, and like we're always having this conversation back and forth throughout the diaspora, where we're talking back to each other. That's how our music is shaped. So we haven't been existing in silos. And so kind of thinking about this idea of movement, right? And so I'm thinking the idea of the South and this notion of a global South, so that even if you're in New York and you're a Black person, you're a part of like a global South, like this kind of understanding.
I love that, and will be stalking you to follow what you produce with that, because it really is interesting, the shift. We know that there are a lot of Black folks are migrating back to the South, and
Yes,
the impact
myself included.
that it's having, like with on our economies, and with our intelligence bank, and our building and all the things, but also how do we keep the core essence of who we are as we grow into the next iteration of the South, and what in the heck is it going to look like? Because right now I am feeling a bit uncertain.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, it is nerve-wracking. Like what are we doing, and are we doing enough, right?
Mhm.
That's the thing. Like what are we doing, and are we doing enough, and are we doing the right kinds of things?
Yeah.
But again, go back to the blues. Like really the lesson is in the blues, right? We know that and I was talking to my son about this, and he's really distraught, because these are the kids who grew up with like the only president they knew was Obama, like from birth, right? So they, this is how they view the world. And so like he's really distraught. He's a social policy major, and he's really, I call him left of left Billups. And that's great. But the fact that he's like, the physical embodiment of all this worry, and I
Mm.
had to have the conversation. I said, we have been here before. We have. And we figure out ways to survive, and not just survive, but we figure out ways to thrive. We
Yes.
do. And so while I am concerned, I'm not bothered, because I know that we will make a way, that we understand how to make a meaning out of meaningless suffering. And we will get over. We will get over. We will.
Wow. That. Whew, okay. So we touched on this a little bit. The difference between Afro and African futurism. But for our audience members who aren't quite in the know as to why this distinction came about, can you shed a little light on that for them?
Oh, this is a touchy area, but I will say what I think. I think that the authors that are understanding themselves as African futurists are drawing on specifically African ideologies and experiences and cultures, and not appropriating them in ways that may be like African American writers who aren't like tied to that culture. Like you might go back and like you take I don't know, you want to do something that you heard about, like, in Ghanaian practice, right?
Mm-hmm.
But like they're either tied in very direct, concrete ways. This is the culture of grandma, right? Even if they are, first generation Americans, but they're still connected to the continent in those ways, and drawing on specific African stories that is a part of that memory, and it's not a part of our experience in the States. Some people think of it as divisive, but and I can see that, but I don't think that. I think that there's a need to say that we're not just derivative, right? That like this story, like this ideology, has been a part of our culture forever, and so that's what I think. That's how I think. Whereas it feels like Afrofuturism, some people think like this, oh, you just got here. And I think the African futurists are like, oh, we've already been there. Like, we've always been here. You're catching up with us. I mean, and not in a negative way, but in a, like, let me just make it clear to you. This is a part of my cosmology, the way I understand and move in the world. This is not a new thing. You can, pick this Black Panther stuff up if you want to, but we have been here. And so I don't think of it as competitive or divisive in that way. And I just want to like show and make sure that we're respecting how people understand themselves. And there are lots of writers who think of what they're doing as more expansive than Afrofuturism. So, I'm walking that tight line on that one. I don't want anybody coming for me on Twitter. I don't want anybody coming for me on Twitter. I'm working closely.
Yeah, because we already know.
Yes.
So, but maybe in relation to that, how important do you think it is for authors of the African diaspora to have a place or a space where their voices and their stories are platformed and amplified, just similar to what we try to do with Black Ink or Book Festival?
Yeah, no, it's really important. And one of the things that, I'm thinking about, because again, the industry is always like, we can have one person or one group at a time. Like, so like, if like now is like, the Africans' turn, right? And so the Black Africans are like, the books are popping off, like really, like there's so many great authors coming out of different areas of Africa, and that's amazing. Like finally, right? Like, because there's an industry, like, but they weren't getting the kind of the crossover appeal, right? Like you had to be a student, and then you kind of know, like otherwise people only knew like, Chinua Achebe, right? And so it's like, okay, there's more than that, right? There's a whole bunch of stuff, right? But that would be the only one person. And so this is great, the explosion of it. But now, like if you look at it, like people are like, okay, well, we got the African writers. So like the African American writers, you got to take a back seat to it, right? I mean, and that's strange. That like these fake barriers, right? That we should be just kind of like reading each other, and we always have. And I always go back to the figure of Langston Hughes, who was an international figure. We talk about him, you know, as an African American and you know, a part of the Harlem Renaissance, but like he was like everywhere, right? You know, and but that's not uncommon, but it's not the story that we tell. So we need to start telling the right story. We need to expand the stories that we tell, that we have always been in conversation with another. But even with that said, yes, to have a specific space, because I think also that when you're thinking about criticism, that I believe that the critiques or the literary criticism has to come from within the culture and not from outside of the culture. And so that is really important. I want, you know, the African writers to be writing critically about African texts and not just having everybody else writing about those texts. And it's not to say you can't, because I write about like African texts. Like, you know, I have published on Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie, you know, I have published on like Zakes Mda, but I am mindful that I am an outsider writing about this text. You know, I know that just because like I'm Black doesn't make me, you know, his kinfolk, right? Like, you know, I understand that, and so we have to be very respectful of those places and spaces, and I think that's interesting and important. And we have to listen, and we can't just say, "Oh, it's all the same," because it's not. It is not all the same. It really isn't.
I have so many thoughts, and just as a writer, and I love sci-fi fantasy, or it's really more paranormal, urban fantasy, paranormal fantasy, and I also read a lot of it. And what I've recognized is there is an abundance of Nigerian American storytellers in the YA, because I read a lot of YA, because right now that seems to be where the energy and the money is going in terms of publishing. And there were a lot of, and they're great, but a lot of Nigerian American storytellers that are getting shine, which I absolutely love, because I've read a lot of it, and it is amazing.
Amazing.
But there's this little these Caribbean authors who are quietly doing the thing in the background with some of the very similar amazing stories, and they're not getting that big thing. And then there's Tracy Dion with to that sister.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Woo! Absolutely.
I mean, my excitement level for her is beyond.
Absolutely.
Standing out, and but just, and so I say all that to your point where there's this invisible barrier that they put up, and we're only going to do these folks now, and then your turn, maybe, you know, as you're waiting at the gate, and not how the publishing industry doesn't understand that we are hungry for all of the stories.
All of it at the same time.
At the same time. At the same time.
Yeah. And I mean, I read, you know, I read everything. I do. And I think a lot of people, they read everything. Like you find people, like people give you recommendations. It's like, okay, I'm reading that. And I'm reading everything. But so I don't think they trust us as readers. I think they don't have faith, and you know, that they're thinking that we're just like in a specific genre, and then that's all, and that we can't, like, I don't know, that we don't read intertextually, and we do. We absolutely do. So they don't trust us. They really don't trust us. It's
if you're Black in America, you had to read.
Yes, absolutely. You do. You do this all the time. Yeah, you do it all the time.
Oh my gosh.
And you identify you understand, like you don't have to have been, in Lagos ever, right? And you can get it. Like you get it. You do.
Absolutely. Okay. Thank you for indulging me on that. So as I'm looking at the time, and I want to be respectful. So I have two more. I'm going to get to cut to the chase. You mentioned some really amazing writers.
Mhm.
Tell us who we should, and I think, sorry, I'm going to just go ahead and say it. I am so in love with the phraseology, the Black Fantastic,
Mhm.
that I just want you to know I'm now your biggest fan, and also will be using that phrase a lot. So tell us, who should we be reading and
So,
listening to in the Black?
yeah,
In,
and I'm shaking it up tonight because I think you can find a lot of people. But what I wanted to do today was to like maybe kind of talk about the things that maybe you don't know, and I want to push the boundaries of what could be considered the Black Fantastic. But I'm going to start with a normal one. So everybody knows about Octavia Butler, but I don't think they read Wild Seed. So I brought this up. Read this one. Like there's so much going on in that text. Parable of the sower. Yeah, yeah, yes, yes. But I really want this kind of conversation about like shapeshifters, and especially I brought this one out because there was the conversation about Black people being mermaids. And of course, we know that mermaids were Black. Absolutely. If you just know anything about Mami Wata, you understand this. This is not. This is not, and it should have been this way all along,
all
right?
the
So,
time.
like putting somebody in this position is just like writing the history in the first place, right?
Yes.
And so we get this kind of shape shifting kind of thing happening in Wild Seed. So I wanted to remind everybody, go back to Wild Seed,
Okay.
read Wild Seed. The other thing I wanted to do is to suggest Gloria Naylor's Mama Day, because people sleep on this, and I would consider this a part of the Black Fantastic. And so look at this. If you want to, go back and kind of think about those cultural and spiritual technologies of Gullah Geechee culture, go back to Mama Day.
You are going to make me go reread everything.
Yes, go back and think about it through the lens of the Black Fantastic. And here's one of my favorites. And again, it's the Palm Wine Drinkard, and this is by Amos Tutuola. And as I was starting my journey thinking about like magical realism and African diaspora texts, I went back to this particular text because there's like all of this. Like if you like fantasy, go read Tutuola. Read this one. And then also there's the second one. It's My Life in the Bush of Ghosts. Amazing, awesome. It's so good. So you will thank me. You will send me an email and you will thank me. So if you don't know this one, definitely do that one. And then I wanted to just kind of, I mentioned Ben Okri, but a lot of people don't know Ben Okri's work. And so I just pulled out The Famished Road as an example. People think of it and they label it magical realism, but I want to push that boundary and say I think it's Black Fantastic. So go and read that. So again, not the traditional ones that people say, but you can find those yourselves. I wanted to dig out things that maybe you have read in the past. You didn't think about them as the Black Fantastic. And I wanted you to just go back and rethink them, reconsider them.
Yes.
And then one other person out, this is one of my buddies, Sophia Samatar, and I don't have the book here. It's at home, unfortunately. But I want to, go read anything by Sophia Samatar, because she's a beautiful writer, and she is. I don't know. I need to ask how she would label, because maybe she labels it African-futurism. I'm not sure. That's a question I will have to ask her. But go read Sophia Samatar.
Well, thank you. Before we wrap up, is there anything else? Did we leave any stone unturned? Any anything you want to, take us out with?
Yeah, I am hoping that everybody will just start to reconsider and go back and reclaim. So, one of the projects that I'm working on is attempting to think about um, nonfiction as as speculative. And so the project I'm working on with Clarissa West White now, we're looking at Mary McLeod Bethune as actually a Black fantastic speaker, author, thinker. Right now, you're like, well, how is this right? But she's absolutely, again, kind of thinking forward and trying to imagine a world. Because I mean, writing in her time and thinking in her time and moving in her time, like, thinking about being free is not, but she's in conversation with all of these other individuals, right? People already say that, like, Du Bois is definitely, Black fantastic Afrofuturism. They're thinking about his text as, his like the comment. They're thinking about his fiction. But I would say that even if you go back and look at his nonfiction, that you can find elements of the fantastic, of the forward thinking, of future, right? Black people are always doing this. And so that would be my challenge to you, is to kind of go back and reclaim some of those texts that we haven't really looked at in this way.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Thank you. That now, mind blown, but we'll check it out.
Absolutely.
I just want to thank you for your time and your energy and allowing me to geek out. This is really the stuff that I love. And books, storytelling, good storytelling, future focused. I'm that magical realism girl, but I love that paranormal fantasy. But I also want that sci-fi, that different world
Absolutely.
where we are our best selves. And so, with that, again, thank you. And you have been amazing. And we hope that you will join us for the Black Ink Book Festival this year. If you can't join us in person, you are certainly welcome to join us online.
Absolutely.
And for you viewers out there, tonight was our kickoff. This year's theme is Black to the Future. And so, what better way to launch into Black Ink Book Festival season than with a conversation with Dr. Seretha Williams? And this, take something from it. Go read one of these books. I know that Mama Day is going to be something I pull out before the end of the year because my mind is blown and I need to rethink that. But also, just to give you guys a quick heads up, because we're rolling into time, want to tell you guys who's coming. So Stephen Barnes and his amazing wife, writer Tana Nariv Dew, will be the speakers, the keynote speakers for our fireside chat on Thursday, January 12th. It is virtual. If you don't know who Stephen Barnes is, he wrote in the Star Wars series, y'all. He also wrote this amazing duology, Lion's Blood and Zulu Heart. And it's a reimagining of what America would look like if slaves were white and slave owners were Black. Um, it was like flipped everybody out when it first came out. And then Tana Nariv Dew wrote My Soul to Take and The Living Blood. Y'all know I love a good vampire. It's an entire series. I think there's about 4 books. I just named a couple. She also has written in the horror genre, The Good House. She's got some amazing work out there as well. And so we are super excited that they will be kicking off the festival for us. And we'll have lots of workshops as usual. We invite you guys to come listen. And then Saturday, the 14th of January, will be the culmination of our Black Ink Book Festival. We are going to be live this year, y'all, and we are super excited. More details to come. Um, but our keynote speaker is Namina Forna, and she has written The Gilded Ones and The Merciless Ones. And so you guys check those books out before before the event so that you can really dig in and learn more about her as a writer and her creativity and her curiosity about characters and writing. It is in the YA genre, or not its own genre, but you get it. You guys check it out. Thank you so much for your time and your patience and for joining us for this conversation. And we look forward to seeing you guys in person in January. And thank you again to Dr. Williams for just the engaging conversation, the learning. I did a lot of learning. I hope you guys did as well. And we will talk to you soon. Ciao. Stay posted on our socials, y'all, for more info.